Congratulations! You made the varsity, the podcast. My name is John Arand, and I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, Mark Ein joins the varsity. I reached out to Mark almost as soon as I heard that Josh Kushner and Bob Iger bought the Lakers for $12.5 billion. And that's because Mark knows a thing or two about sports team ownership. You see, Mark owned the Washington Castles of World Team Tennis, and he then parlayed that into buying the local tennis tournament here in D.C. He now has a portfolio that includes stakes in the Washington Commanders, the Baltimore Orioles, Leeds United. Mark has a very strategic view of team ownership, and I'm pretty sure that you'll get a lot out of his views of the defining trends of the business. But before I get to Mark, today is Wednesday, August 19th, and here's what I'm watching. I'm fascinated by what's happening in Chicago. Can you imagine the Bears not playing in Chicago, or even worse, not playing in Illinois at all? It looks like that's about to happen. Now, this isn't new. I mean, I live in D.C., which hasn't hosted a Washington Commanders game in 30 years. They play in Maryland. Well, last week, the Bears team chairman, George McCaskey, said that he hadn't talked with anyone from Illinois in the past 2 months, and the team is focused on a move to Hammond, Indiana. So it's looking more and more like the Bears bluffed their way into having to leave Chicago. The Hammond Bears. My goodness. Okay, now, let's get to Mark Ein. Mark Ein, first of all, thank you so much for joining the pod. It is one of the goals of my pod is to get as many people from the DMV onto the pod that are interested in sports business. You know, we've had Paul Rabel, we've had Scott Van Pelt, Joe House has been on it. Thank you very much. The pride of BCC now is on the pod. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, John. I'm a big fan of your writing and of your pod, so it's an honor and pleasure to be with you.
I want to get started. You've been so active in the Washington D.C. Area space, where the Washington Castles, which I do want to talk about later on. I think what you did with them was as a D.C. resident was a lot of fun. You have ownership stakes in the Commanders. You have an ownership stake in the Orioles, not in D.C., but over in Leeds. Can you give? Let's start before we get into some of the issues and topics with your origin story. Like, when did you first realize that this is a path that you wanted to take, and why did you decide to take it?
Yeah, so it started where you started the conversation. I grew up in the D.C. area in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and when I was a young boy growing up, the highlights of my life were being a ball kid at the tennis tournament and going to the football games with my dad. And the greatest memories of my childhood were sitting in section 320, row 5, seats 19 and 20 with my dad watching that team. And I just had these memories of what that meant to me, what it meant to my friends, what it meant to our whole city and our community. So I left DC for a while and worked in New York on Wall Street and worked on the West Coast in venture capital, went to business school, and I came back to DC right after business school at a young firm called the Carlyle Group, which was only 30 people and $100 million of capital under management. Obviously, now it's one of the biggest investment management firms in the world. But when I came back, I sort of had a vision of my life, and in my ideal state, what it would be to have success in business, to do things I was interested in, which really was to build companies. I wanted to be involved civically in this city that raised me. I wanted to be involved philanthropically. I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to be in sports. It really was part of the vision when I moved back to DC after business school, was to try to have that life. And sports was very intentionally part of it because I loved it. I knew what it meant to me, and I know what it can mean to our whole community. And so from the very beginning, that was something I was interested in. Long before I had the resources to do anything, I was sort of fishing around. There was a moment where David Rubenstein, is the founder of Carlyle, thought maybe there was something for us to do with the Capitals and the Bullets at the time with Abe Pollin, who we knew, and we talked about that. I got the book when the Cook family sold the Redskins to Dan, and I got the book and tried to see if there was something to do. There wasn't anything, and it was ahead of my time being able to do something like that, but there was always an interest in that. And then, as you said, I started, my first thing was the Washington Castles, was starting a world team tennis team in Washington, D.C. And I knew of the league back from when it was a really big deal at its origins, and it had kind of faded into a less relevant place in the sports landscape. But I had friends who played in the league and thought it was amazing. Obviously, Billie Jean King was the founder and was driving it. And I happened to meet her at the U.S. Open, or I asked to meet with her in 2007. And she said she always wanted a team in Washington, never found the right person to do it, and let's talk about it. And out of that sprang the Washington Castles, which was the first world team tennis team ever in the Washington market, and really got me started along the journey in sports. And I should say, just as an interesting note, another person who got their first sports start in World Team Tennis was Bob Kraft. And there's a great NFL Films 6-minute video where Bob Kraft talks about everything he learned about building a sports franchise came from owning the Boston Lobsters. And for me, obviously different but similar, there is something about your first sports experience being not just an owner, but an owner operator, which Bob was at the time, and which I certainly was. Like, I really rolled up my sleeves and helped build this from scratch. And, we were known for this really fun environment. We had great players. We had Venus and Serena and Martina Hingis and Leander Paes. We also were known for building tennis stadiums in incredible places in the middle of downtown Washington, where the old convention center was, on the waterfront. And the last thing was we built a stadium on the roof of a building in Union Market, which was it was really extraordinary. It was also an extraordinary way to lose a lot of money, so we did that only once. But you
Let
learn a
me interrupt
lot
you for a
about.
quick second. The
Yeah.
greatest thing about the Washington Castles to me is look, you're a DC guy. It has been a barren sports landscape, for quite a while. Our only titles were with the Washington Castles,
Yeah,
specifically minded. You really, like, you talk about rolling up your sleeves. Like, you really took that seriously, much more so than it seems
I
that
did.
other teams in the league. Yeah,
I
more
did.
than
I
just the
did.
stadium experience.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And I did. I really, this was like such a passion of mine. And from the beginning, you never know when you start anything, a company or anything, or a sports team, what's going to happen. And from the very beginning, people really embraced it. And then that was really motivating to me, to make sure that we did an amazing job, not just for the fans in the stadium, but also to have like these incredible teams. So as you said, we won 6 championships. We actually beat the Lakers record. We won 34 straight matches over 3 seasons, which, if people know World Team Tennis, it is so hard because players are moving, the schedule. I mean, we won one game where players had to take a connecting red eye back from the West Coast and play the next night. We won a bunch of matches where we had match points against us. But the really fun thing, John, about that too, was I saw how the success in the community and the passion that the fans showed really impacted the players. And again, we had Serena and Venus and Martina Hingis, Leander Paes. I mean, Leander Paes was inducted in the Hall of Fame 2 years ago, the Tennis Hall of Fame, and he spent a good couple minutes of his Hall of Fame speech talking about the Washington Castles, which was incredibly moving. But for a guy who accomplished so much and was being inducted in the Hall of Fame, to recognize what that experience meant to him, to me, said a lot. When I talked to Venus, and she talked a lot about how much playing on that team meant and how motivating it was. Um, and I learned that both when the two sides feed off themselves, and when you get to bigger sports teams, there's the business side and the competitive side, but they always feed off one another. And the better your fans, the better fan base you have, the more players like playing there, the more better players you have, the more you get a good fan base. And when you get them both going, you create a virtuous cycle, which just leads to really amazing things.
So when you started with the Washington Castles, was this a late? How much of it was a labor of love versus you saw an opportunity to really, um, A, grow the castles, or B, sort of uh, develop your chops so that you could then become a partner in, bigger clubs like the
Yeah.
Orioles or the Commanders?
It mainly was a labor of love, John. I mean, I would I would have moments where I would convince myself this was going to be a great business opportunity and I was building something of value. Those were not, those were the minority of the time where I thought that. Most of the time, I mean, I didn't have to pay much for the franchise, but I lost a bunch of money every year. And in my hopes, I thought maybe there was a path where ultimately there would be franchise value, but it wasn't the motivation. The motivation for me was just, I intrinsically like building things and I had a lot of fun building it. I intrinsically love doing great things in the city that, as we've talked about, I grew up in and I live in, and doing great things for the community. So I got a lot of intrinsic value out of that. And I was just very, it really was, that one was mainly a labor of love and just something that I got a lot of intrinsic value out of, more than it was ever realistically seeing a great return out of the money that was invested there.
So I want to keep on this because I do find this fascinating about how did you turn that into these ownership stakes that you are now overseeing?
Yeah. So, um, what was interesting is the tournament in town that I now own has been there since 1969. I was a ball kid, as I mentioned, for a lot of years, and it really was a highlight of my youth, was being a ball kid at that tournament. As we were having more success in the castles, we were actually becoming reasonably competitive with the tournament, which was an unnatural act. Like, a world team tennis team should not be competitive with an ATP 500 event, but realistically, people were really enjoying the fan experience and the way that the world team tennis was being put on. And I'd say that the tournament over the years needed some help. And so when you looked at attendance and you looked at a lot of metrics, we were starting to be competitive with that. I always really wanted to own the tournament because I knew that we could do amazing things with it. A lot of that came after doing the castles. I thought if we applied the things we're doing here to a major event, the results should be really spectacular. But it was owned by a foundation for a long time. I asked them a few times, they weren't interested. And then out of the blue in 2018, I they came to me and said, "Look, we think we need to do something. The tournament needs a lot of investment. We don't really have the wherewithal to do it, and you're the natural party to do it. Would you be interested?" I jumped on it, of course. It ended up being a lot more complicated and drawn out process where people from around the world bid on it, and the board had a fiduciary duty to check all their alternatives. So it ended up being less straightforward than it started. But I was so happy that we were able to get that done. And it's been an amazing 7 years since then.
Mark, I love that story. We just had Ramona Shelburne on the pod, and she was talking about the Lakers sale, which was started by what essentially was a cold call. The same.
Yeah.
It's almost the same story of like, I want to
Yeah.
buy your team, I want to buy your tournament. And these big transactions like that, often they just
They
start
do.
very innocently.
Yeah, they do. And my pitch to them was actually much more expansive. It was this amazing after school program organization called the WTF. It's been around actually 70 years before the tournament. And Donald Dell and John Harris, Arthur Ashe started the tournament. They donated it to the charity. And it really is the lifeblood of the charity in terms of their fundraising and also a lot of what makes it unique. And so when I went to them, I said, "Look, let me run the tournament, take all the financial upside down. So let me take care of that. But I'm going to let you keep all the intangible benefits that you had. So you guys have suites and you have tickets, and the kids get to work at the tournament, and you have a gala, and the tournament supports it and donates auction items. We're going to take everything you have outside of the tournament and let you always have that in perpetuity, as long as the tournament is in Washington, D.C., which I hope is forever. You will keep all of that, In addition, you'll get a pot of money that will endow your organization forever, plus some ongoing financial support. And you now don't have any of the downside risk, which was starting to get more and more as the tours were requiring them to invest more into the tournament. And so what we really constructed was a win-win where they got all the things that they covet and desire, gave them a nest egg, but also relieved them of the financial obligations.
So you, as you got in, you were part, the when you and Josh were, bought the
Yeah.
Commanders, uh, set a record. Nobody's ever seen
Yeah.
that amount of money paid for it. It seems very quaint now. What is it, just over
I
the
know. I know.
$6 billion? I
I
mean,
know.
talk about a steal. Yeah. Do you feel like that was a steal now? Is it looking back on it?
I mean, in
I
hindsight,
do.
it definitely wasn't a steal, but it was a good value. And as it turns out, um, and John, I should just go back because actually it's interesting. When you talk about my motivation for doing this. When I was doing World Team Tennis for a while, Josh was, thriving in his career, leading Apollo, and he and I have been friends since we were little kids. Like literally, we went to elementary school together. We played on soccer teams. His dad was an orthodontist. My dad's a doctor. Like we were really like closest of friends growing up, and stayed close our whole lives. Went to the same college, same business school, worked next door to each other on Wall Street. And one night in the summer after one of my World Team Tennis seasons, Josh and I had dinner, and he said, "You looks like you're having so much fun doing this. Should we go look at other sports franchises together?" And kind of was like, "I don't really have time to spend a lot of. I don't have a lot of time to spend on it, but you could sort of lead it. But I want to be involved, and we could do it together." And so he and I, this was probably 2009 and 10, really focused on the NBA because the NBA at that time, people forget, was really struggling. There wasn't a labor deal, there wasn't a media deal. And a large number of the owners actually were in reasonable financial distress in their core businesses after the financial crisis. And I think the stats were something like the league in aggregate like lost $300 million, and 2/3 of the teams were losing $800 million, and a few were making some money. So it was, and this was sort of what Josh has done in his career, was be a contrarian and bet when other people don't see the value. And it is a little bit what I had done too. And so we spent a lot of time. We actually talked to a lot of owners about buying or investing in teams. We talked to Ted about providing the capital for him to buy the Wizards, which he was eventually going to do. Um, None of those ended up coming to fruition. And then Josh came upon the Sixers opportunity and worked on it, and sort of said, "Well, you're going to do this." And I knew it would be a good investment, but it wasn't in my town. And I just thought, for me, the magic really of sports for me was doing it in the city that I live in and I grew up in. And so I passed on it. It was probably the single worst investment decision of my life, because I think Josh paid $250 million, and it's been such a success. And obviously now it's going to reach new heights with LeBron. I'm so proud of what Josh has done there. So that was an
Yeah, but Mark,
interesting moment
you
to.
couldn't live with yourself if you were cheering for a team that had
I
Philadelphia
know.
across his chest. Come
I
on,
thought
my
of that,
gosh.
John. I know, and as I've had floor seats at the Wizards for 20 years, and I was like, how could I do it? That was the reason I didn't. But I knew it would be a good investment. I love Josh. I really believed in what he was doing. I just, yeah, at the end of the day, back then, my motivation was to do things in my community. And so then when the Commanders came up, it was really interesting because I had looked at buying the Cincinnati tennis tournament that year in 22, and put together a group, and Josh was part of it. We had an amazing group. Redbird was part of it, Serena, Venus, like a really Lion Tree. We had a really amazing group, and I think we were pretty much the cover bid to Ben Navarro. And we ended up not getting it, and Ben got it, and he's done an amazing job with the Cincinnati tournament. But the same banker who represented the USTA in that sale also knew Dan, and he and I met at the US Open, and he said, "Would you ever consider, if there was an opportunity in the Commanders, to do something on a minority basis?" Which we said no. But then not that long thereafter, I think in November, the word got out that Dan was exploring a sale. And literally in 5 minutes, Josh and I had touched base. And then ironically, 10 minutes later, Mitch Rails and I had touched base. And, we got going on it.
As you made that purchase, um, sitting where we are now, are you surprised at these franchise valuations that are good? Because every couple of months, I'm right. It seems like every 6 months, I'm writing,
Yeah.
setting a record for a team sale. Sitting where you are right now, and you look back on it, this is a two-part question. Were you surprised, and why is this happening? Why all of a sudden are these franchise values going through the roof?
Yeah. So it's interesting. If I look at all these things, the Sixers back when we looked at it, the Commanders, the NFL now, the time frame's just accelerating. Like we thought with Josh, that model, we would make 3 times our money in 10 years. It ended up being 3 times in 3 years. We thought, the Commanders would be 2 to 3 times in 10 years. It's probably 2 times in 3 years. Same thing. Um, so yeah, we're surprised at how fast values are going up, for sure. But we also think there's good reason for it, and actually, we really don't think that it's going to end anytime soon. And you ask why? I do think people view this a bit as a business and even more as a store of value. And as people look to diversify their wealth, and oftentimes diversify their wealth for things that have huge volatility, maybe huge upside, but also a lot of downside, taking some of that wealth and putting it into a franchise where there only are a certain amount and there always will only be a certain number of them is actually a prudent financial decision. And what's happening is it's just more and more people are realizing this and thinking about it. It's more out there in the ether where people talk and think about it. One of the things about our transaction for the Commanders that was interesting is even after the original core group, we still needed to go raise a good amount of money. And, it's pretty well known that we have a good sized group there. It's an amazing ownership group that's a huge asset for the franchise. But I think we were all surprised at how many people were willing to write really big checks into a, minority stake into a sports team back then. And I think it was just a precursor of now what's happened over the last 30 years is more and more really wealthy people view this as a store of value. And, just like a piece of art it's even more intangible than sports team because there is no cash flow or gold or Bitcoin or anything else people consider stores of value, where financially you say, I want some of my portfolio in these things. Sports teams are that. And then there's all the other things about sports that are really appealing to a lot of people, including sports innately itself. If you live in the city, it's great. The people you get to meet, the business opportunities that come out of it. So it's a store of value plus, 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 plus. I just think more and more wealthy people are now coming to that conclusion and seeking out these opportunities.
So as you talk to these people to convince them to take a stake in the team, what what works the best in terms of selling them on it? And I guess I should ask you, do you feel like you're selling them on it?
No.
Is it sort of a vanity play about like, hey, you know what, you get the real estate of those front row seats, or is it like a business play about people that you can rub elbows with, or is it you write us this check and the valuation is going to double within what, 6 years, 7 years,
Yeah.
however long.
It's
What
really
worked the
that.
best?
I mean,
Mhm.
all it really the cornerstone of and it wasn't a pitch or a sales thing. It was like because you only want people who are enthusiastic. You don't want to sell
Oh,
anyone.
I bet
So when
you
someone
turned
says,
down a ton of people. Yeah, yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, you want the right people who you want to be partners with in any of these things. And the pitch, it's a pitch is, or the reason is really that this is a store of value. And there's a whole bunch of trends that are going to make sports continue to thrive. You know, the things that bring people together in the world are sports and music, but sports arguably more than anything else. People have more free time. People want experiences. There's like all the big trends play into sports. It's the only place you can aggregate big audiences. Obviously, the NFL is the biggest of them all. So it really was a business first argument. The other stuff, I don't think anyone viewed it, especially as a limited partner, as a vanity play at all. I don't think that's a motivation. You know, yeah, you're going to have fun being part of it and going to the games, and we'll do that together. I think that's a small part of it, but the checks are too big for people to make that the basis of their decision. It has to be a rational financial decision, and so far, it's proven to always be that. The values only keep going up. Now, I would say if you asked me the question, why do you think they'll keep going up, and what's the reason? It is the increased demand from wealthy people. It is a huge concentration, newly created wealth, and oftentimes in companies that, you know, are huge disruptors, but also mean people realize at some point they could get disrupted. So the two big recent sales in sports, the Seahawks and the Lakers, both were led by people who have huge stakes in AI companies, and taking a little bit of that wealth and putting it into a real asset that is a scarce asset and always will be. That probably it's a rational financial thing to do, and the downside from doing that is way less, even at a high valuation, than probably the equity that you're selling to trade into that. So I think, and these AI companies have created so many billionaires and so many 100 millionaires that I think there's now a whole new crop of people who, some of them, not all of them, some of them are going to want to find a way to invest in sports. And that demand to be part of it, I think, will keep fueling values as long as the underlying economics of the franchises, which keep going up and up and up, I mean, keep getting better and better and better too.
So let me throw out a caution flag, and that is that uh, team valuations historically have been based on media revenues because these TV contracts have hit the stratosphere, and you know as well as anybody that the media business is challenged. You know, the cord cutting is taking away like billions of dollars of revenue from these TV companies, and they tell me that the gravy train is, you know, I mean, that the NBA is in they just ended their first year of an 11-year deal
Yeah.
that pays a lot of money, $76 billion. So they're fine. The NFL is probably going to be okay, but like that, those next deals, like who knows what the media landscape's going to look like. And the media executives that I talk to were like, buyer beware. I hope that this is pinned on something other than media revenue.
Yeah, so it's a very good point. But you said something I think is really important, which is the NBA is fine. They have their long-term deal. The NFL will be fine. The biggest leagues and biggest properties probably will be okay, and there still will be good media deals for those. I think there's been a lot of sports investing in secondary and tertiary properties or newly formed leagues where a lot of the upside was hopefully getting a media deal. Um, I think those are the ones that are most at risk, because I think what's going to happen is the big media companies are going to have to focus more of their resources on a smaller number of things as the value and prices go up. And I think that's where there's real risk. I think I'll give you more broadly some downside into sports valuations, and I'll give you a counteracting upside. I do think right now the world, I mean, the world for wealthy people is in a good place, and people are doing well across the board. We'd be fooling ourselves if you said if there was a recession or a tougher the markets went down, that will have an impact on this for a period of time. I don't think it'll impact the long-term trend, But you could definitely, and that's what always happens. I mentioned when Josh and I first looked at the NBA, it was after the financial crisis. And when people have issues in their core businesses, they either have to sell their teams or they can't invest in new ones. And so this is all in a backdrop of a really good economic environment for people who are in the market to do these things. So that's a thing that I think in a short term you could see values pause the increase or even go down. The flip side of it is the governor on a lot of these valuations is still there's pretty tight rules on some capital formation. So like each league is different, but there's limits to how much private equity can invest. There's limits on sovereign wealth funds or prohibitions in some leagues. There's limits on corporations. There's limits on going public. There are pools of capital and even just the start of private equity getting into sports and getting permission to do that has been a big driver of this because now you don't need to find people worth billions of dollars, but the private equity firms can pool smaller amounts and make sports investments. As I think it's inevitable as values go up, the leagues are going to need to open up the capital formation rules to either let those pools of capital invest more into them and some that may be prohibited today may have more permission to enter leagues they can't now or to be able to own more of teams, including like sovereign wealth funds. Once that opens up, then you have gigantic new pools of capital who I think will also look at sports. And then that's going to be another driver of further valuation increases.
I want to get back on Josh Kushner and the Seahawks sale. You know, the open AI and the idea of the Lakers being a, you know, this is a stable place to put in $12 billion investment.
Yeah.
What I'm look, I'm a journalist at heart, so I'm going to go negative here. But what is a
Yeah.
worst case scenario, Mark? Like on this, how much could that 12.5 billion drop, or is a worst case scenario that it just stays at 12.5?
Oh, it could definitely go down. I mean, it just was sold a year ago for 10, so it certainly could go down. But I think, and look, I don't, I mean, I think Josh Kushner, I don't know him well at all, but he's done amazing things. He's built an amazing firm, invested in amazing companies. But to the extent that some of the wealth that he's going to invest is based upon that he's obviously been a very big investor from the early days in OpenAI. So I assume he has a gigantic financial stake there, and that'll be some of the sources that he'll use to buy the Lakers. OpenAI may be an amazing transformative company and may keep going up, but at today's valuations, I'd say there's probably meaningfully less downside risk in owning a piece of the Lakers than a piece of OpenAI. So
Mm.
if you're making that trade with some of it, and it's a diversification thing, the other thing that happens is all of a sudden, and this is not specific to him, but just in general, is when you end up owning a piece of something that becomes worth so much money, then a huge amount of your wealth is tied up in one thing. And so taking some of that and putting it in something else like a sports team, which does have some downside, but way less, again, is a really smart, rational thing to do.
Yeah, and I think you just described exactly why the valuations have been going up and should probably stay up for the foreseeable future. Hey, I want to get back into a clear passion of yours, the tennis. Like you are a tennis fan, you're a tennis supporter. You grew up in the era of Martina and Chrissy,
Yeah.
McEnroe, Borg, Jimmy Connors. Um, Yet every time I write about tennis, I get no reactions. Like it's hard to get out there. Even with the local Tiafo in the ranks. What can you do to to make tennis more popular in the U.S.?
So that makes me sad to hear that that's your experience, but it doesn't necessarily
I love
surprise
it.
me, especially when
I hung out with you at your tournament and
I
had a
know.
blast and knew the players. It was
Yeah.
great. I
Yeah.
wanted to be
Yeah.
better. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, look, compared to football, that's always going to be the case. Let me start. Tennis is totally thriving right now. Like everyone in the ecosystem is doing really, really well. Players are doing really well, especially at the top of the game, and not just in prize money and endorsements. Tournaments are doing exceptionally well. And for a whole bunch of reasons, tennis is actually having a real cultural moment. You can drive up and down Madison Avenue, and you'll see a number of brands who, in their windows, will have pictures uh, with a connection to tennis, things on the court. And that's not just at the U.S. Open. Like this has been going on now for a couple years. And tennis at its best, like in the 70s, really was it was a sport, but it was a cultural thing as well, right? Um, and there's a little bit of that going on right now. These new athletes who are emerging are amazing global stars with huge followings and great personalities. Brands really love to attach themselves to them. You know, the other amazing strength of tennis is there's really nothing else in the world like for an individual in terms of exposure, like playing in the finals of a Grand Slam. It's two individuals for a really long time. You're not wearing a helmet. Your face is there. The battle's there, and for the whole world to see. You control everything you wear from head to toe. And that's why always at the top of the most highly paid athletes in the world, always two or three of the men were tennis players and virtually all the women were, because the sport lends itself to this global exposure in a way that almost nothing else does for an individual. So the sport is in a really good place. In America, as I said, all the athletes and the tournaments are doing great. I just think it's unrealistic to think that tennis is going to be like basketball or football or maybe baseball. And then you get down to, and then you're in hockey and soccer, and tennis is really popular with a set of people year round. It broadens out during the Grand Slams. I want it to be bigger more often of the year, but it for what it is, it honestly is in a really good place. A really, really good place.
Am I misremembering the 80s? Like it would seem like that CBS, the final US Open final on CBS, we they kicked off the NFL in order to put that on. And
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. You know, I was on the board of the USTA for 6 years, and you know, there's a debate that all sports deal with, which is, do you take the money from what it used to be from the cable company versus the broadcasters? Now it's, do you take the money from the streamers instead of the cable companies, right? And the trade-off is always less audience, but more upfront money. And you know, there was a lot of also non-financial reasons that going exclusively with ESPN was the reason that happened. And I probably on balance, it was the right thing to do. But, you know, you ask how do we make tennis bigger in America? The thing I would say, John, you mentioned you came to my event and you saw that week in Washington, D.C., it's a bit of a takeover of the city, right? Like everyone's thinking about tennis. The players are everywhere. The media is everywhere. We've sold out every ticket since 2019. I think the power of strong events throughout the country is really, really important. And when I was on the USTA board, this was my single biggest issue. When I was a kid, there were 45 ATP and WTA events in America. Today, there's like 11. And you are competing with sports leagues. Take the big four, add soccer. They all have roughly 30 teams. So they're all in roughly 30 markets for 4 to 6 months of the year. And tennis is in 11 markets for a week or two. I think a big thing we should do, and the USTA has a new CEO, Craig Tiley, who's one of the great innovative entrepreneurial leaders in tennis. One of the things I'm hopeful is that collectively we can figure out how to do more pro live events in America, because I don't think you can overstate how helpful and important it is for people to be able to go see them live in their markets. And I do think if I had to pick one thing beyond like having an American male or female number one in the world, it's probably the biggest. The other one that would be big would be just to have more live events and more markets in the US.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more because when you talked about the tournament, it's at this. You've done a really nice job with Rock Creek, but like back when you were a ball boy, it was a community park,
Yeah.
and they built some
Yeah.
stands there, and everybody in the DC market knew about the tournament. They would go to the tournament. We'd always laugh because it'd be like 100 degrees and humid, and these
Yeah. Yeah.
some of these international tennis players would be like, "What hit us?"
Yeah.
There is a definite value to having this tour stop in DC, so you get to see it with your own eyes. You go and you feel it, and it's a proper big event. I loved it. I had a great
Yeah.
time at that event.
Well, thanks. Well, and then it also is a great inspiration for kids. Like you get young kids who go there and they press their nose up against the fence when players are practicing. They get the autographs when the players are coming by. They watch their matches. I really believe that you need to see it to be it, and having live events in the market gives kids to aspire to be. They see it and it does inspire them. And so we have a bunch of kids now, players who are playing on the pro tour, from Francis Tiafoe to Haley Baptiste to Robin Montgomery, all of which came to this tournament as young kids. And their first interaction with pro tennis was coming to the tournament. Again, if you think about the big 4 or 5 sports in America, they're in the 30 biggest US markets for roughly 4 to 6 months of the year. So if you're a kid and you like basketball or baseball or hockey, soccer, or football, you got lots of chances to have those moments. In tennis, we just don't have as many of them. And the ones we have are super powerful at fueling all parts of the ecosystem. So my hope is it's not that easy. The calendar's full. Events don't become available very often, but that incrementally we can continue to add events back to the States, and you can have the experience you did in Washington in more places. The last thing I'd say, John, just as indicative of how healthy tennis is, and our event is, we sold 2/3 of the tickets for next year's tournament already at the tournament last year. So this year. So if you think about that, no one knows we don't announce players until 3 or 4 months in advance, start to, and then a lot only 2 months in advance. It's the summer. People don't know their summer plans yet, but 2/3 of the tickets were already sold to people who just said, I just love this event so much. I'm going to plan my summer around. I'm going to be here, and I know I'm going to have a great time. And I think if you want a sign of like real strength of obviously an event, but also a sport, that's about as good a one as I can cite.
By the way, Mark, I appreciate your answer to that question. I asked you a very negative question, a negative focus question, and you're like, "No, things are going well." We had John Wertheim on the pod, and he had a similar experience. He said, "Go to any tournament in Europe or any tournament in Asia. Like you see these fans, and everything seems very, very crowded and really well done." But thank you so much for joining us. We've come to the end. I could go on for another hour. We didn't get to talk DC sports, Mark, but thanks
Next
thanks a
time.
ton.
We'll come
We'll see you
back.
soon.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Mark Ein. Thank you for listening to the Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. Thanks to Puck's Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, Odyssey's Bob Tabador, and Nesson's Matt Colpitz and Jenny Aruda. If you like this podcast, sign up for my newsletter. It's also called The Varsity. Go to puck.news, use the code word The Varsity, all one word, for a 20% discount. I will see you on Sunday.